Welcome to everyone who is joining this conference of the Self-Knowledge course. Today we will be addressing topic number 44, in which we will study some of the aspects that make up what we call the I of Treason. The objective of this conference is to understand what treason is, why we constantly betray the commitments and pacts we make, why we betray other people, and above all, why and how we continuously betray our own consciousness. Today we will discover how all of our I's, or psychological defects, are structured through treason. Treason is based on three fundamental aspects, which we can call the three traitors. This conference will be especially interesting because we will study these three traitors from a historical perspective, and at the same time we will see how these same historical figures are represented within our own inner world. As always, let us begin by establishing the context and clarifying what treason is. To commit treason is to break or violate a pact or an agreement. On the physical plane, we easily recognize treason through what we commonly call betrayal. For example, when a boyfriend tells his girlfriend that he will love her all his life, and after some time he becomes bored and abandons that promise, there is betrayal. However, what we are really seeing there is treason, because a pact was made and then violated. The same occurs when someone commits to paying a debt on a certain date, and although having the means to do so, does not fulfill that commitment. Outwardly, this appears as a betrayal of trust, but in essence it is treason since an agreement has been broken. Likewise, there is treason when something is falsified or adulterated. In all these cases, something sacred or binding has been violated, a promise, a bond, or a pact. So, to be clear, betrayal is the visible manifestation on the physical plane of a deeper act of treason. Whenever a pact or commitment is not fulfilled, treason is present. Now, what is important to understand is that we all come from the Absolute with a purpose. We are not here as visitors or tourists. Each one of us descended into physical manifestation in order to achieve mastery, to attain the self-realization of our own inner being. That is the awakening of 100% of our consciousness. Therefore, we all made a pact with our being to accomplish this purpose and to return triumphant. We came here to know ourselves, to rescue all wisdom trapped within the ego, and to transform all of our darkness into light. Each time, in a given existence, that we receive the knowledge capable of helping us fulfill this purpose, we internally renew that pact to seek self-realization and to work toward this goal, regardless of the cost. However, in order to achieve this, we must confront the three enemies of the Christ that we all carry within us, and which together form what we call the I of Treason. Let us remember that in Conference 28, where we spoke about the universal Christ and the individual Christ, we explained what the Christ truly is. We spoke about that cosmic drama that Master Jesus represented in the Holy Land in order to open the meaning of initiation to all human beings and to leave engraved in the collective memory of this humanity the path that every aspirant who wishes to incarnate the inner Christ must live internally. The initiates of all times, the masters of all centuries, have had to live this cosmic drama within themselves here and now. And each one of us must also live it within ourselves if we aspire to reach self-realization. Through self-observation, we realize that we live this drama from moment to moment. Ultimately, the Christ is our own consciousness. It is born within us, it grows within us, and it must expel the merchants from the temple. We know that the temple is our own body, and that the merchants of the temple are all our psychological defects, which constantly sell our energy. The inner Christ must eliminate all the undesirable elements that we carry within us. The intimate Christ, not being lustful, must eliminate from himself the psychological elements of lust. The intimate Christ, being peace and love in himself, must eliminate from himself the undesirable elements of anger. The intimate Christ, not being greedy, must eliminate from himself the undesirable elements of greed. The intimate Christ, not being envious, must eliminate from himself the psychological aggregates of envy. The intimate Christ, being perfect humility, infinite modesty, and absolute simplicity, must eliminate from himself the disgusting elements of pride, vanity, and conceit. The intimate Christ, the Word, the creative Logos, always living in constant activity, must eliminate from himself the undesirable elements of inertia, laziness, and stagnation. The Lord of perfection, accustomed to fasting, temperate, never a friend of drunkenness or great banquets, must eliminate from himself the abominable elements of gluttony. And all those psychological aggregates that we carry within us hate the Christ, they hate the light, they hate conscience itself, and they cry out for the crucifixion of the inner Christ. Thus, today we are going to see how we crucify our intimate Christ from moment to moment. We are going to see the relationship between what happened historically with Master Jesus and what happens continuously within each one of us. First, we must observe that just as the historical Christ had many detractors who rejected him, in the same way within us there are psychological aspects that reject the development of our inner Christ. Historically, we see that the Christ was rejected by the priests, the elders, and the scribes. The priests hate him, that is, they do not understand him. They want the Lord of perfections to live exclusively within time, in accordance with their rigid and unbreakable dogmas. The elders, the inhabitants of the earth, the good homeowners, the prudent people, the people of experience, hate the red Christ, the Christ of the Great Rebellion, because he disrupts their antiquated, reactionary, and petrified habits and customs. The scribes of the temple, the scoundrels of the intellect, hate the intimate Christ because he is the antithesis of the Antichrist, which is intellectualism. The Christ is the declared enemy of that accumulation of theories that abounds so profusely in the markets of bodies and souls. Likewise, in order to develop our inner Christ, we will have to confront these same detractors within our own psychology. The priests represent all our fanatical eyes, our puritanical, celibate, and sex-hating eyes, which refuse to understand that in order to develop the inner Christ, a sexual work is necessary. The elders, the good homeowners, the prudent people, represent our customs, our beliefs, and our dogmas, which become obstacles when we seek to obey our consciousness above what is morally or socially established. The scribes of the temple represent our intellectual eyes, full of theories, concepts, doubts, and skepticism, which do not allow us to open ourselves to practice and to the direct experimentation of reality. These are powerful adversaries that we must face internally if we wish to begin this path. But once we decide to take the path of initiation, we will discover that within us, in our own psyche, there also exist the same three traitors of the historical Christ: Judas, the demon of desire; Pilate, the demon of the mind; and Caiaphas, the demon of ill will. And these three traitors within us, desire, mind, and ill will, are what constantly lead us to betray our consciousness and to abandon again and again the inner path that leads to self-realization. As I mentioned before, the first traitor is Judas. Historically, we know Judas as the disciple of Master Jesus, who betrayed him by selling him for 30 pieces of silver. However, it is important to clarify that Master Judas merely represented the role of the traitor in the cosmic drama. He is a master who was fully aware of the role he had to play and who consciously agreed to collaborate with Master Jesus, assuming that difficult role in order to represent the traitor, the demon of desire that all of us carry within. In fact, Master Judas can be invoked on the astral plane, where we can confirm that he is a master and receive interesting and valuable teachings from him. In the historical drama, we see that Judas betrayed the Christ for money. This represents something that constantly occurs within us. Judas, the demon of desire, always exchanges the Lord for 30 pieces of silver, that is, for liquor, money, fame, vanities, fornication, adultery, and so on. Judas within us represents the demon of desire, the enemy of our inner nature. He represents all of our desires, temptations, and fascinations with the physical world. Our desires sell the Christ, who is our inner fire, in exchange for pleasures, fame, money, and similar attractions. We constantly surrender to the multiple desires that present themselves to us, and in doing so we betray the Christ by exchanging our energy for the fleeting pleasure that the ego provides. Desire is the enemy of our superior nature, and therefore the enemy of spiritual birth, because it prevents all creation by extinguishing the fire necessary to be born. It prevents us from making superior creations within ourselves, because we prefer to give in to the desire to expel sexual energy rather than do the work required to achieve chastity and learn to transmute our sexual energy in sexual practice with our partner. Desire is the source of all strength, because it is the fire that animates everything. If we surrender to our desires, we become their slaves. If we deny each desire, we release the fire hidden within it, and we become owners of that force, because we begin to take possession of the strength contained in each desire. When we do not know how to deny ourselves, we simply run after each desire in daily life. And because of this, we lose the necessary fire to create ourselves sexually. Learning to combat this traitor is essential if we want to advance in the great work, because without this struggle, the esoteric work cannot truly begin. So how do we work with this demon? The Gospel of Judas says, "Blessed is he who sees in my light the light of my master." Here we are given an important key. When we are able to see the fire, the Christ that is trapped within desire, we can rescue it. But when we do not see it, we lose it from moment to moment. This shows us the importance of valuing our energy, valuing that inner fire, the Christ, that we can rescue for consciousness every time we manage to deny one of the many egoic desires that arise in us from moment to moment. Learning to fight this traitor is fundamental if we want to advance on the inner path. This demon is defeated through self-denial, that is, by refusing to satisfy the desires of the ego. Throughout the day, we experience thousands of desires. The desire to fight, to criticize, to watch pornography, to masturbate or fornicate, the desire to engage in idle conversations, to drink alcohol, to smoke, to eat excessively, and so on. Within each desire is trapped a portion of our Christic fire, a portion of our consciousness that we must rescue. We must also understand that the stronger the desire we are experiencing, the greater the amount of Christic fire we can rescue for consciousness if we refuse to satisfy that desire. We deny ourselves when we practice psychological death from moment to moment. Faced with any desire, we observe ourselves, discover the psychological I that is generating that desire, and eliminate it. In this way, we begin to stop being traitors. As we begin to deny ourselves, we begin to balance the centers, and the work of spiritual birth starts to bear fruit. The creative energy of the Holy Spirit then crystallizes the superior existential bodies of the being. Now let us move on to the second traitor. The second traitor is Pilate, the demon of the mind. He is the one who always washes his hands, who always declares himself innocent. He is never to blame. He constantly justifies himself and before others. He always looks for evasions and loopholes in order to avoid his own responsibility. Historically, we know him as the Roman governor of Judea, who betrayed the Christ by condemning him and then declaring himself innocent, shifting the blame onto others. At the decisive moment when he had to choose the fate of the Christ, he left the decision to the people, offering them the choice between freeing Christ or freeing Barabbas. When the people chose to free the thief instead of the Christ, Pilate washed his hands, presenting himself as blameless. This is exactly what our inner Pilate, the demon of the mind and of justification, does constantly. Whenever we face a problem, we justify ourselves, we identify with the situation, and we do not know how to take advantage of the circumstance. We always find excuses for not working on ourselves and for not eliminating our defects. Every time we are faced with a desire, we allow the people to choose. The people represent the ego within us, and instead of listening to our consciousness, we let the ego decide. We let the mind speak. We search for justifications to give free rein to desire, and in this way we betray our inner Christ while we wash our hands. If we feel the impulse to fight, to shout, or to offend, we give in to that desire. We fight, we shout, we offend, and then we justify ourselves by blaming the other person. If we feel the desire to take something that does not belong to us, we justify ourselves by saying that we need it, that the other person does not really need it, or that it has little value, and therefore it is not so serious. In this way, we always find some justification to surrender to desire. If we feel the urge to spill our sexual energy, we justify ourselves by saying it will be the last time, or that achieving chastity is very difficult. In short, we find any excuse not to deny the desire. If we feel the desire to be unfaithful to our partner, we justify it by telling ourselves that our partner no longer treats us the same, that they will not notice, or that we are truly in love with the other person. Feeling justified and overwhelmed by desire, we fall into treason. In this way, we constantly betray our consciousness. There is always a justification. Our mind is full of concepts that support and justify our wrong actions. This demon of the mind is the enemy of wisdom because it does not allow us to die within ourselves. Justifications are a terrible obstacle to psychological death because as long as we feel justified, we will never judge the psychological I that is acting in us at that moment. Wisdom comes with death. If one does not die, there can be no wisdom. This demon prevents psychological death, always blames others, and lives judging others instead of judging our own actions. The mind finds thousands of justifications to prevent us from doing the work of our inner being, and countless excuses to keep us doing the work of the ego or the personality. The mind always finds ways out, evasions, and justifications to remain the same. The proper role of the mind is to judge each of our defects through reflection, but it does not fulfill this role. Instead, it remains identified with all subjective processes. This demon does not allow us to die within ourselves because we are never guilty. The blame is always placed on others, on life, or on God, but never on ourselves. And in this way, we never achieve true change. So, how do we combat this demon in order to stop betraying? To combat it, we must stop justifying ourselves. We must judge ourselves ruthlessly. We must not accept the escapes offered by the mind, and we must become serious in our inner work. We must take the grass away from the donkey. We must stop feeding the defects of the intellect and put an end to concepts in order to integrate the mind. Let us remember that the best way to think is not to think, because through excessive intellectualism, the mind has degenerated and no longer understands. The mind must fulfill its true role, which is to judge defects. We must use the mind to reflect on our actions and to judge our psychological defects. We must understand that wisdom comes through death. When we ask for the death of a defect, from that death light is released, which is wisdom, and fire is released, which is love. We defeat this demon by refusing to justify ourselves and by judging ourselves without mercy, by silencing the mind, and in that inner silence we can listen to intuition, which is full wisdom. The third and most dangerous traitor is Caiaphas. Historically, Caiaphas was a Jewish high priest who, upon recognizing who the Christ was, felt threatened in his power and sought the crucifixion of the Master. He knew who Jesus was, and yet he condemned him. He acted consciously and with ill will. Within us, Caiaphas represents the third aspect of the I of Treason, which is the demon of ill will. This demon manifests when we feel a desire, then justify it, and finally act against our consciousness and against the development of our inner Christ, either by doing what the ego wants or by failing to do what we should do in favor of our being. Thus, ill will manifests when we know that we should not do something, yet we do it anyway, and when we know that we should do something, yet we fall into ill will and do not do it. Therefore, this traitor expresses itself through our words, our actions, and our omissions in the field of deeds. This is the most dangerous traitor, because karma is generated here, not in the mind nor in desire, but in what we do against others, or in what we fail to do in favor of others. This demon is especially an enemy of sacrifice for humanity, because ill will does not allow us to sacrifice ourselves. Caiaphas is the enemy of truth. If truth is the being, then Caiaphas is the enemy of the being. He seeks to prevent us from doing the work of our being. Ill will constantly leads us to promise and not fulfill. Our word loses its value because this traitor remains alive within us. Ill will also leads us to waste time on idle and insignificant things. It does not allow us to practice anything. Ill will wants self-realization without work. We can clearly see this ill will in our resistance to establishing and maintaining discipline in our esoteric work. There is unwillingness to do the practices and to comply with the schedules we have set for ourselves to meditate, to sacrifice for humanity, and to work consciously. Even in astral projection, we fall into ill will, because we prefer to let sleep carry us unconsciously into the fifth dimension each night, instead of practicing daily in order to consciously unfold ourselves in the astral plane. The same unwillingness appears with practices such as the jump technique that we recently learned in the course. Despite having so many things to investigate in the astral plane, both about ourselves and about this knowledge, we feel unwilling to investigate and to verify these teachings for ourselves. There is unwillingness to remain awake during the day, in a state of self-observation, discovering the manifestations of the ego and eliminating them. There is unwillingness to meditate, to reflect, to concentrate, to comprehend our defects, and to perform retrospections. There is unwillingness to practice the dervishes, the transmutation of cosmic forces, the transfer of funds, or to negotiate with divine law. There is unwillingness to work on developing conscious love through sacrifice for others. We resist speaking to others about the knowledge, distributing material, preparing ourselves to teach, and sharing the teachings. There is great resistance to teaching. There is also unwillingness to stop fornicating, to achieve chastity, and to begin spiritual birth. Our willpower is currently trapped within our defects, and each one of them is structured through treason. For this reason, we are always willing to waste time on our phones, on social networks, watching videos, playing games for hours, or engaging in other idle activities. We have great willingness to watch television, series, and entertainment, willingness for idle conversations, parties, and revelries, willingness for subjective work, dedicating many hours of our lives to slavish labor that leaves us without energy or time for the work of our being, willingness to sleep and to rest, willingness to fornicate, to satisfy desires, to commit adultery, and so on. But when it comes to the work of consciousness, we experience laziness, sleepiness, yawning, annoyance, fear, and resistance. This is ill will in action, and it is only through self-observation that we can become aware of how dominated we are by ill will and understand that if we do not overcome this inner traitor, we will never be able to walk the inner path in search of truth. So, how are we going to work with our inner Caiaphas? We work on him through conscious sacrifices and voluntary sufferings. And what are conscious sacrifices and voluntary sufferings? They consist in stopping the gratification of the ego, not doing what the ego wants, and instead doing the work of consciousness. In this way, the ego will undoubtedly suffer, but we will also eliminate the eyes of suffering and thus release the fire, the Christ, that is trapped within desire. This is how we pass through voluntary suffering, by resisting the pressure and resistance of the ego. For example, there may be a desire that continually subdues us and causes us to fall into ill will, such as the consumption of a certain drug. When the desire appears, we feel that fire moving within us, pushing us to fall once again. What should we do? If we refuse to satisfy the desire, we defeat the first traitor. If we do not justify ourselves, but instead judge the defect, recognize it as a defect that must die, and pray to the Divine Mother to eliminate it, we defeat the second traitor. And if we resist the pressure of that defect, endure the anxiety and suffering it generates by not being able to feed itself, and consciously and voluntarily pass through that suffering of the ego, then we defeat the third traitor and free ourselves. In this way, we release the fire that the defect had trapped and through which it constantly subjected us. We refuse to hand over our Christ to be crucified by the ego, and we set him free. And the same process applies to every defect that manifests in us from moment to moment, seeking to lead us to betray our word, our promises, and above all, the work of our being. It is important to understand that there are certain acts known as treason to the work, which we must clearly recognize in order not to fall into them, because they can cost us the loss of the right to find our inner path for many existences. For example, we betray the work of our being when we mix this knowledge with pseudo-esoteric teachings, thus corrupting the purity of the teaching, both for ourselves and for others, and diverting the path. We also betray the work when, after having received the knowledge and begun to work, we once again identify with the things of the world and withdraw from the inner work. To abandon esoteric work after having had the privilege of receiving this knowledge in one life is considered treason to the work, and it can result in losing the right to receive this knowledge for many lives. We likewise commit treason against the work of our being when we fornicate willfully. Already knowing the importance of sexual energy, and out of ill will we spill it. Furthermore, when practicing chastity, we betray the Divine Mother by taking another partner. We also betray the work when we internally commit ourselves to our being to carry out the work of self-realization. And then, when faced with the difficulties of the path, or with the pleasures that the world offers, we choose not to fulfill that commitment. And finally, we betray the work when, faced with the decision presented at the beginning of the fifth initiation of major mysteries, we choose the path of nirvana, thus betraying our intimate Christ. These three traitors are within us, here and now, and if we observe ourselves, we can discover them in each of our actions in daily life. These traitors are established in the three brains that we acquired upon entering the human kingdom, and from there they control us, leading us to betray our word, our commitments, and our conscience. In the emotional brain we find Judas, since this is where all desires arise. In the intellectual brain we find Pilate, because it is there that we use the mind to justify the ego. And in the motor instinctive sexual brain we find Caiaphas, where ill will manifests itself through our words, our actions, and our omissions. Therefore, we must constantly observe the mind, the emotions, and sex. We must be alert when a defect wants to manifest itself by awakening a desire. In that moment, we deny the desire, we do not justify ourselves, and we do not fall into ill will. In this way, we continually recover consciousness and are able to carry out this inner work. Remember that all the eyes of our psychology are traitors, constantly leading us to betray our energy and our consciousness. All eyes are judged for treason. Therefore, in order to deepen our comprehension and achieve the elimination of any defect, we can observe what desires it generates in us and what justifications it uses, which ultimately lead us to fall into ill will. If we judge these eyes and eliminate them, we will recover the precious virtue of fidelity and loyalty toward others, toward our partner, and above all, toward our energy and our consciousness. This brings us to the end of today's conference. I hope you have found it as useful and interesting as I have. I would like to invite you to the next conference, a very important lecture in which we will discuss what we must do in order for the practices to yield positive results. In that conference, we will analyze the different factors that may be preventing us from obtaining results in the practices we have learned in this course and how we can resolve them. Do not miss this valuable topic. Until next time.